On the distant planet of Virelia, far away from Earth, there existed a society where beauty and purpose were determined by one thing: the ability to reproduce. It was a world where the most important quality in an individual was their capacity to bear offspring and contribute to the continuation of their species. In this society, there was no room for imperfection, no place for those who couldn't fulfill their biological role. At the heart of this harsh reality was a young woman named Lyra. She had always known she was different, even as a child. While others of her kind grew strong and beautiful, Lyra was fragile, her body not quite as capable as the others. Her skin, though smooth and glowing like the others, had a certain paleness that the healers could not explain. Her eyes, a soft hue of violet, were more distant than the bright, sharp gaze that was expected of Virelian women. Growing up, she watched her peers learn the art of reproduction, how to bear children and raise them as the future leaders of their world. But no matter how hard she tried, Lyra could never fully adapt. There were whispers among the elders, behind closed doors, about her defect. Some said it was a flaw in her genes. Others believed it was something more mysterious, beyond their understanding. They said she was imperfect. By the time Lyra reached her adulthood, the elders of Virelia had made their decision. Her body, they decided, was not fit for breeding. She had been evaluated and found lacking. And in a world where one's worth was measured only by the ability to reproduce, she had no value. In the eyes of her people, she was expendable. Without warning, the council cast her aside. They informed her that she would be sent to the desolate outskirts of the planet, a place where those like her were sent to be forgotten. No more would she be allowed to live among the others. The day she was told, she stood in silence, unable to understand the finality in their voices. They spoke as though she were nothing more than a tool no longer needed. Lyra's heart shattered as the elders explained that her defective body had no place in their future. They gave her no choice, no explanation, just the cold finality of their words. You are no longer welcome here. You will leave and never return. Alone and trembling, she was led to the outskirts of the city, far from the lush fields where her people lived, and far from the towering spires that symbolized their greatness. She was cast into the wilderness of Virelia, a barren place of jagged rocks and empty winds. The elders believed that if she were left there, she would eventually die, her existence fading into the planet's harsh wilderness. But Lyra was not ready to give up. She refused to let the world decide her fate so easily. With each passing day, she struggled to survive, learning to adapt to the harsh conditions. She hunted for food, finding strange plants and creatures that could sustain her. Though she was alone, she refused to believe that her life had no meaning. There had to be more to her existence than this abandonment. In the solitude of the wilderness, she found strength that she never knew she had. But even with this newfound resilience, she could not shake the weight of rejection. The world had thrown her away, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of being unwanted. She often wondered if she would ever find a place where she truly belonged, or if the universe had cast her aside forever. One cold night, as she sat by the fire she had carefully built from dry branches, she looked up at the stars. She could see the twinkling lights in the sky, but none of them felt close enough to reach. The loneliness pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. She had no one to talk to, no one to share her pain with. The silence of the wilderness was deafening. Yet, as she stared into the night, something within her refused to give in. She was not like the others, true, but that did not mean she was useless. She still had the power to survive, to live, and to find her own path, even if the world had turned its back on her. Her mind wandered to thoughts of her childhood, of the joy she once felt when she imagined her future. She had dreamed of being a mother, just like the other women of her kind, but now that dream seemed as distant as the stars themselves. In that moment, a realization swept over her. Her rejection did not define her. She could still find purpose, even if it was not in the way her society had once expected. The path before her was uncertain, but she was determined to walk it. She would not be a victim of fate. She would carve her own future. But she could not do it alone. As she sat in the cold, feeling the weight of the night pressing in on her, a sudden movement in the distance caught her eye. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to break the stillness of night. Lyra's heart raced as she strained her eyes, trying to make out the figure. It was a man, a human. Lyra's heart raced as she stared at the figure in the distance. It was not much more than a shadow at first, but as it drew nearer, she saw that it was a human, a man, and he was walking steadily toward her. She had never seen a human before. The stories from the few travelers who had passed through Verelia never mentioned much about them, except that they were from another world, far away. The human's presence in her world seemed like an impossible event, as if fate had decided to bring someone to her when she least expected it. He moved slowly, carefully, as though he was unsure of the path ahead. His clothes were worn and torn, evidence of a journey that had been long and difficult. But what caught her attention most was his eyes. They were wide with curiosity, as though everything in his surroundings was new and unfamiliar. Despite the uncertainty in his gaze, there was a calmness in his posture, a quiet strength that intrigued her. For a moment, Lyra hesitated. Should she approach him? What would he think of her? He was human. After all, an outsider. She had never known any beings from another world, and she wasn't sure how to react. She knew that her own people would never have welcomed someone like him, but she wasn't sure why she felt so drawn to him. Her body trembled slightly, the cold night air biting into her skin, but she stood firm, deciding to wait and see if he would notice her first. It didn't take long. As the man drew closer, he suddenly stopped, as though sensing her presence. His eyes scanned the surroundings, finally locking onto her form, sitting quietly by the fire she had built. Lyra couldn't quite tell what was going through his mind, but he looked confused, as if he wasn't sure whether he was imagining things or if she was really there. Then, with cautious steps, he moved toward her. "Hello." The man's voice was rough, hoarse from the journey, but there was kindness in it. He didn't speak in the harsh tones of Verelia's leaders, who would have seen her as nothing more than a failure. No, this human, this stranger, spoke to her as though he truly wanted to know who she was. Lyra blinked, unsure how to respond. She hadn't spoken to anyone in what felt like an eternity. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, and it took her a moment to find the words. "Hello," she replied, her tone barely audible against the wind. The man's eyes widened as he took a careful step closer, still keeping his distance. He studied her for a moment, noticing the alien features that made her so different from him. Her pale blue skin, the soft violet glow in her eyes, the delicate shape of her ears. She was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He seemed to pause, as though processing the sight of her, but then he smiled gently, as if reassured by the kindness in her voice. "I'm not from around here," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "My ship crashed. I don't know where I am. Can you help me?" Lyra glanced at the ground, not knowing how to explain the strange feelings that stirred inside her. She had been alone for so long, isolated in the wilderness, and now here was someone real, standing in front of her. She didn't know what to do. Was he here to hurt her, or was he simply lost, just like she had been? The air between them hung heavy with uncertainty, but something in his eyes made her feel safe, or at least safer than she had in a long time. She nodded, though her voice was still tentative. "I can help you. But I don't know how to get you off this planet. I don't even know where you came from." The man's face softened. He looked around at the desolate landscape. "I didn't expect to end up here," he muttered. "I was trying to find a way out, but I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." He sighed, looking weary. "I've been walking for what feels like forever." Lyra studied him carefully. He didn't seem like a threat. She had heard of humans from the few travelers that had visited her planet, but she had never met one herself. Her kind had always kept to their strict rules and expectations, But there was something about this human that seemed different. He was alone, much like she had been. And yet, unlike her, he seemed to have hope, a spark of something that made him believe things would get better. "I've been alone too," Lyra said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. They cast me out, said I wasn't fit, that I was defective." The human's brow furrowed as he listened to her words. "Defective," he repeated, his voice filled with concern. "That's a harsh word. What do they mean by that?" Lyra hesitated. It was painful to speak about her rejection, but something in the human's gaze made it feel less frightening. "They told me my body wasn't good enough, that I could never bear children. So they threw me out, told me I was useless." The man looked horrified. "They said that to you?" His voice was filled with disbelief. "That's awful." Lyra nodded, her eyes distant. "It doesn't matter anymore. I can survive on my own." He crouched down in front of her, careful not to crowd her. "No one should ever be treated like that," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I don't know who they are, but they're wrong. You're not defective. You're alive, and that's more than enough." The simple words, so full of kindness and compassion, felt like a balm on Lyra's wounded heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. This human, this stranger, was telling her that she was not broken, that she had value. As they sat in silence, the fire between them crackling softly, Lyra realized that in this unexpected encounter, she might have just found the connection she had been yearning for. Not just survival, but something deeper, something that could fill the empty space she had felt in her heart for so long. The night was still, and in that moment, Lyra found that she was not as alone as she had once believed. As the days passed, Lyra and the human man, who had introduced himself as Kal, settled into a rhythm of survival. They worked together to find food and shelter, each day learning more about the other, and the bond between them deepened. The alien woman had never expected to meet anyone again, much less a human. But now, for the first time in what felt like years, she felt a sense of belonging. Lyra had always been taught that Virelian strength was defined by the ability to work alone, to thrive in solitude, to rely on no one. It was a lesson that had led her to the wilderness when she had been cast out. But Kale was different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't see her as a broken tool or a failure. He saw her as someone worthy of respect and kindness, and that made all the difference. They spent their days searching for food, using Cal's knowledge of his world to help them. He had told her that he was from Earth, a planet full of people, and though it seemed distant and strange to her, there was a certain magic in his words. Earth, a planet she had only heard of in vague stories, now seemed like a real place, somewhere far from the alien rejection she had known her entire life. Cal had a strange, quiet strength about him. His skills, though simple, were effective. He showed Lyra how to build better shelters, how to catch small animals for food, and how to use the resources of the land to their advantage. In return, Lyra taught him about the plants and herbs that grew on Virelia, things that only her kind knew. Together, they created a balance, surviving in the wilderness as a team. The work was tiring, and the harsh conditions made everything more difficult. The days were long, with the sun barely rising before it dipped low again. The winds were constant, blowing across the land, and the nights were cold. But they both learned to rely on each other's presence for warmth and comfort. There were moments when they sat by the fire in silence, watching the flames dance, both lost in their thoughts but somehow at peace with each other's company. One evening, as they sat together, Kale spoke of his past. He told her about his home on Earth, a place filled with cities and vast landscapes, a far cry from the wilds of Virelia. He spoke of his family, his friends, and the life he had left behind when his ship crash-landed. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of sorrow in it. He missed Earth, and Lyra could tell that his longing was deep. "What is it like?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice soft against the crackling of the fire. Kale looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "It's a beautiful place, full of life. There's green everywhere. Forests, fields, oceans. People live in cities, but there's still nature too. You can stand outside and breathe clean air, and the sky stretches out forever. Lyra closed her eyes as she imagined it. She had never seen a forest or an ocean. The planet she knew was cold and barren, marked by jagged rocks and empty fields. The idea of a world filled with green was almost too much to believe. "Do you want to go back?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. She didn't know why she asked the question. Perhaps it was because she feared that one day Cal would leave her to return to his world. The idea of losing the only person who had shown her kindness felt like something she couldn't bear. Cal's expression softened. "I do," he said after a pause. "I want to go back, but I don't know how to get there. My ship is destroyed. I'm not sure if I'll ever find a way back." He looked at her, his eyes sincere. "But I'm not alone anymore. And for now, that's enough." The weight of his words settled between them, and Lyra felt something stir inside her, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She had always been alone, but here, with Cale, she didn't feel so lost. There was a shared understanding between them, something that needed no explanation. They were both outcasts in their own ways, but together, they were finding a way to survive. The next few days were filled with the routine of daily life, gathering food, building shelter, and learning from each other. But one evening, as the sun began to set, the winds grew fiercer, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Lyra could feel the chill seeping into her bones as they sat huddled near their fire. "We need to find better shelter," Cale said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "This place won't be safe if the storm hits harder." Lyra nodded, but she was tired. The day had been long, and the thought of finding a new shelter felt overwhelming. But she couldn't ignore Cal's concern. They needed a safe place. "Let's go tomorrow," she said quietly. "Tonight, let's just rest." Cale didn't argue. He simply nodded and sat a little closer to her, the warmth of his presence a small comfort in the cold, harsh world they had found themselves in. As the storm began to roar outside, Lyra thought about everything she had been through. She had been thrown out, abandoned, left to die by the society that had once valued her. But now, here with Cale, she was learning to live again. Maybe her past didn't define her. Maybe she could find a future. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it was possible. The storm raged through the night, but inside their small shelter, Lyra and Cale found a moment of peace. They had each other, and in this desolate place, that was all they needed. The days passed, and the world around Lyra and Cale continued to be harsh and unyielding, yet the warmth between them grew stronger. Their bond, built from shared struggles and quiet moments by the fire, was becoming something neither of them had expected. Cale, though still a stranger to her, had shown Lyra a kindness she had never known. In return, she offered him her knowledge of the planet, the plants, the land, and the ways of survival. As the weeks went by, they learned more about each other. Cal's stories of Earth became a cherished escape for Lyra. She imagined the green fields, the tall buildings, the wide oceans that he described. And she shared her own stories of her life before the wilderness, of her time among her people, when she had believed that her only purpose was to bear children, to contribute to the survival of the Virilian race. But one day, as they were walking through a field of tall, thick grass in search of food, Cale turned to her with a look that made Lyra pause. His expression was serious, but there was a softness to it, an understanding that made Lyra's heart beat a little faster. "Lyra," he began, his voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something important." Lyra looked at him, curious but also nervous. She had never been asked anything important before, not by anyone who truly cared. Her people had always seen her as a tool, an object meant to serve a purpose. She wasn't sure how to react to Cal's question, but she nodded. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Cale took a deep breath. his eyes meeting hers. "I know we've talked a lot about your past, about how they treated you, how they cast you out. But I want to ask, what do you want now? What do you really want, Lyra?" The question took her by surprise. It wasn't about surviving or about getting through the day anymore. It was something deeper, something that made her think about her future, something she had never allowed herself to imagine. She looked away, her heart pounding in her chest. What did she want? She had never been allowed to have dreams of her own, only the dreams that her people had forced upon her. The dream of being a mother, of being useful, of fulfilling her biological duty. But those dreams had been shattered, and she had been left with nothing. "I'm not sure," she admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I never allowed myself to think beyond the rules they set for me. They told me I couldn't be a mother. They said I was defective." Cale's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "Lyra, you're not defective. You're not broken." His words were simple, but they held a weight that made Lyra feel as if he truly saw her, as if he understood her in a way no one ever had before. She shook her head, the doubts swirling inside her. "But I was cast out. They told me I couldn't do the one thing I was supposed to do, give life. And now I'm alone. No one wants me. I'm not worthy of being a mother." Cale reached out, gently lifting her chin so that she had to look him in the eyes. His hands were warm, steady, and comforting. "Lyra, you don't need their approval. You don't need their permission to be who you are. I don't know what your world is like, but I know that you deserve to make your own choices. And if you want to be a mother, then I believe you can." Lyra felt a tremor in her chest as his words sank in. No one had ever said such things to her, not even her own family. To hear someone from a completely different world, believe in her so strongly was like a weight lifting off her shoulders. "Do you really believe that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale smiled softly, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I do. You're strong, Lyra. You've been through so much already, and you're still standing. You have the power to shape your own future." His words were like a light breaking through the darkness in her mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she could still have a life of her own, beyond the cruel expectations of her society. She could choose who she wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, she could still be the mother she had once dreamed of becoming. I want to try," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to try to be a mother, but I don't know how." Cale looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "We'll figure it out together," he said with quiet determination. "I don't have all the answers, but I'll be here for you. We'll make this work. We'll find a way." The sincerity in his voice touched her in ways she couldn't fully explain. In that moment, Lyra realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live. She was beginning to dream again. And it wasn't just about being a mother. It was about creating a life for herself that was hers to shape, free from the rejection that had once defined her. As the days passed, the idea of motherhood began to feel less like a distant, impossible dream, and more like something she could one day make a reality. It wasn't just about the child she could bring into the world. It was about the strength she had within herself. It was about healing, about becoming whole again, despite everything that had happened to her. The fire in her heart, once dimmed by rejection, was starting to burn brighter. And for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt that she had a future, one that she would build with Cale by her side. Together, they would face whatever came next, and together, they would make a life in a world that had once cast them both aside. The days in the wilderness were long, but they no longer felt like a sentence for Lyra. They had become a new chapter of her life, one she was beginning to shape with her own hands. With Cale by her side, she no longer felt lost. Together, they had found a rhythm in their survival, and as time passed, she began to think that perhaps, against all odds, she might be able to fulfill the dream she had once given up on. But there was still much to learn and much to do. Cale had shown her how to create shelters that could withstand the worst storms. He had taught her how to work with the materials available on the planet, making tools and weapons that helped them hunt and protect themselves. In return, Lyra had shared her knowledge of Aurelia, its plants, its terrain, and its secrets. She had become Cal's guide in a world that was as foreign to him as his world had been to her. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Cal turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Lyra," he said, his voice calm yet serious, "I've been thinking." Lyra looked up from the fire, her attention fully on him. She could tell by the way he spoke that this was important. "What is it?" Cal hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "You said you wanted to be a mother, but I'm not sure how we can make that happen. I don't know anything about the way your people reproduce. I don't even know if it's possible, given your condition." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had been afraid of this conversation. Deep down, she had always known that her situation was different from what Cal might have expected. After all, she was an outcast, a person who had been deemed defective. The thought of not being able to become a mother after everything she had gone through filled her with doubt, but she pushed it aside. "I know," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know if it's possible either. I've never heard of anyone who could overcome this." Cal looked at her with a mix of empathy and determination. "But we don't have to let that stop us, do we? We've already survived so much together. And I believe there's a way to make it happen. We just have to figure it out." Lyra felt a sense of warmth spread through her at Cal's words. His unwavering belief in her was something she had never known. No one in her society had ever been so kind, so certain that she was more than what they had made her feel. He was right. She couldn't just give up on her dream, not when she had someone like him by her side. Together, they could find a way. For the next few days, the two of them worked tirelessly, exploring the possibility of a solution. They searched the land for anything that might help her condition, from the plants she knew so well to the creatures that roamed the wilds. They spent hours experimenting with different herbs and substances, trying to find something that might restore her fertility. But no matter how hard they tried, nothing seemed to work. Frustration began to settle in. Each failed attempt weighed heavily on Lyra's heart, but she refused to let it defeat her. She had come too far to give up now. She could still feel the dream of motherhood stirring inside her. She wasn't ready to let it go, not yet. One evening, after another long day of searching, Cal sat next to her by the fire. He looked at her with a serious expression, as if he had made a decision. "We need to try something else," he said quietly. "I don't know how it will work, but I think there might be a way. You said your people's biology is very different from mine. Maybe that's why nothing we've tried has worked. But what if we combine our biology? What if the human side of things could help? Maybe that's how it's meant to be." Lyra turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. Cal's suggestion was unexpected, and yet it made sense in a way. She had always thought that the problem lay in her own body, but what if the answer was in their union? The idea of combining their biology seemed so strange, so foreign, but it felt right too. Maybe it was their shared bond, their trust in each other, that could make the impossible possible. She looked into Cal's eyes and saw only compassion and hope. "You really think that could work?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Cal nodded, his expression gentle but determined. "I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. We've faced so much together already. We've defied the odds more than once. Why not now?" Lyra took a deep breath. The uncertainty still lingered, but it was overshadowed by the warmth that filled her heart. She had never felt more alive, more connected to someone, than she did with Cal. The world around them might be uncertain and unforgiving, but in this moment, she felt like they could conquer anything. "I want to try," she said softly, her voice steady now. "I want to believe that I can have a future, a family, with you." Cal smiled, a look of relief and joy spreading across his face. "Then we'll make it happen, together." That night, As they lay beneath the stars, Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had found someone who saw her as she truly was, not as a failure, not as a broken being, but as someone with the potential to create a future. And together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. As the days passed, Lyra and Cale grew closer, their partnership becoming more than just a matter of survival. They had both come to rely on each other, not just for food and shelter, but for something deeper: hope, companionship, and trust. But their small world was about to change. Their quiet life in the wilderness, though peaceful, could not remain hidden forever. The people of Verelia, the ones who had rejected Lyra, had not forgotten her. And soon, their presence would be felt again. One evening, as Lyra and Cale gathered firewood, they noticed movement in the distance, shadows moving through the trees. Lyra tensed, her heart racing. She had learned to be cautious, always alert to the dangers of the wilderness. But this was different. These figures were not the wild animals they had come to expect. These were Verelians. Cale noticed her shift in posture and immediately turned to face her, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. "What is it?" he asked quietly, his voice low. "Verelians," Lyra whispered, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area. "They found us." Her words sent a chill down Cale's spine. The Verelians were the last people he would want to face. He had seen the coldness in their society, the harsh judgments they placed on their own. If they found out that Lyra was alive, they would not let her go easily. They would take her back, force her into their rules and expectations, and punish her for defying them. Cale couldn't let that happen. "We need to move," Cale said, his voice firm. "Now." Lyra nodded quickly, fear rising in her chest. The Verelians were not just dangerous because of their advanced technology and strength. They were dangerous because they had no empathy for those they deemed useless. Lyra had learned it the hard way. She couldn't go back to them. Not after everything she had been through. The two of them moved quickly, slipping into the forest as quietly as possible. Lyra's mind raced. She could feel the eyes of the Verelians upon her, even though she couldn't see them. They would be searching for her. They would stop at nothing to bring her back. For hours, they moved through the thick trees, their steps silent against the forest floor. Cale's instincts guided them, leading them away from the direction the Verelians had come. He knew that they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan, a way to escape this endless chase. By the time they reached the edge of a rocky cliff, Lyra was breathless. Her legs ached, and her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She turned to Cale, her face pale with exhaustion. "Where do we go now?" Cale paused, looking out at the vast expanse of land before them. "We need to get out of their territory," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I think I know a way out of here, but we'll need to move quickly." Lyra nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew that they couldn't afford to waste any time. If the Verelians caught up with them, they wouldn't stand a chance. "We have to go," she said, her voice steady. As they made their way toward a narrow path that led through the jagged rocks, Lyra felt the weight of their situation press down on her. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about escaping a society that had rejected her, a society that had labeled her as defective. And now, it seemed that society had come to claim. For the first time since she had been cast out, Lyra understood the true cost of her freedom. She had lived so long in the wilderness, struggling to survive, but she had never fully realized how much her past had shaped her present. The Verelians would not let her go easily. They would fight to take her back, to force her into a life she no longer wanted. As they made their way along the rocky path, Cale's hand gripped hers firmly. His touch was a reminder that she was not alone. He was with her, and together, they would find a way out. But Lyra couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they couldn't escape. What if the Verelians caught up with them? What would they do to Cale? She had never stopped to consider how much danger she had brought into his life. She turned to him, her voice trembling slightly. "Cale, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this. You don't have to keep following me. If you want to leave, I'll understand." Cale stopped in his tracks and turned to face her, his expression filled with concern. "Lyra, don't say that. I'm not leaving you. You don't have to face this alone." His words were a lifeline. They gave her the strength to keep moving forward, to keep fighting. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Cale, and together they would fight to make sure they had a future where they could live free from the judgment of others. As they continued down the narrow path, Lyra knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But she also knew that she was no longer the person she had been when she first arrived in the wilderness. She had found strength in herself, and with Cale's help, she had found a new purpose. The Varillians might have rejected her, but she wasn't going to let them define her future. She had the power to shape her own destiny, and with Cale by her side, she would do whatever it took to protect that future. The night air was thick with tension as Lyra and Cale moved swiftly through the forest. The pursuit had been relentless, the Varillian soldiers closing in with every passing hour. The flickering light of their torches illuminated the dense trees in the distance, and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the stillness of the wilderness. Lyra's heart raced, but she refused to slow down. They had come too far, fought too hard, to let themselves be caught now. Cale led the way, his senses sharp as he navigated through the winding paths. He could feel the weight of the danger pressing in on them. But there was something in his step, something in the way he moved, that suggested a determination beyond just survival. It was the same determination that had guided him since the day his ship crashed on Virilia. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for Lyra, for their future. Lyra's breath was heavy, her legs aching with exhaustion. But she kept going, focusing on Cale's steady pace and the feeling of his hand clasped tightly around hers. She didn't know what would happen if they were caught, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going back. She had spent her life in the shadows of others' expectations, in the prison of their judgments. She wouldn't let that life define her any longer. She had found a new path, a new chance, one that Cale had shown her. And now she was going to fight for it. As they reached the edge of the forest, the path ahead opened up to a wide open field. The moonlight bathed the landscape in a soft glow, casting long shadows on the ground. But in the distance, Lyra could see the outlines of a Varillian patrol moving steadily toward them. Their time was running out. Cale's voice broke through the silence, low but urgent. "We need to get to the river. It's our only chance." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The river was the only natural barrier between them and the Varillians. It would give them the chance to lose their pursuers in the darkness, to make their escape while the soldiers were distracted by the currents and the changing landscape. With no time to waste, they sprinted across the field, their footsteps muffled by the tall grass. The sound of the Varillians' pursuit was growing louder, and Lyra's mind raced as she focused on the distant river, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Her body screamed in protest, but she pushed herself harder, driven by the belief that they could escape, that there was still a chance for a new beginning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the river. The water was swift and cold, but it offered the only real chance they had. Cale looked back, his eyes searching the horizon for signs of the Varillian soldiers. "We need to cross," he said, pulling her toward the riverbank. "Hurry." Lyra hesitated for just a moment, her gaze sweeping the vast expanse of water. It was treacherous, the current too strong to fight easily. But she knew they had no other choice. Without a word, she stepped into the water, the cold rushing up her legs and chilling her to the bone. Cale followed closely behind her, his hand never leaving hers. Together, they'd fought against the current, the water tugging at their bodies as they waded deeper. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the sound of rushing water drowning out all other noise. Lyra's breath came in sharp gasps as she focused on the task at hand. Every step forward was a battle, but with Cale beside her, she felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't alone. For the first time, she truly felt that she was not just surviving, she was living. As they reached the middle of the river, Lyra looked back, the distant lights of the Virilian patrol now barely visible in the darkness. She had no idea how much time they had left before the soldiers realized they had crossed. But it didn't matter. For the first time, she felt in control of her own fate. Cale's grip on her hand tightened. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Just a little longer." With the strength of their shared determination, they pushed forward, the river seeming less like a barrier and more like a gateway to the future. The current threatened to pull them off course, but together, they managed to keep moving forward. The fear and exhaustion began to fade, replaced by the certainty that they could make it together. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the opposite shore. Lyra collapsed onto the soft earth, gasping for air, her body trembling from the cold and the effort. But she didn't care. She had made it. They had made it. Cale knelt beside her, his hand steady as he helped her sit up. He looked into her eyes, his expression filled with a quiet pride. "We did it," he said softly, a smile tugging at his lips. Lyra's heart swelled in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had truly earned her freedom. The Virilians might have tried to break her, but they had failed. She was no longer bound by their rules, their judgments. She was free to choose her own path. And for the first time, she felt hopeful about what that path might be. As they sat together, the river flowing gently beside them, Lyra realized that this moment, this quiet, peaceful escape, was the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer defined by her past. With Cale by her side, she could face whatever came next. The stars above them shone brightly, a reminder that no matter how dark the journey had been, there was always light on the horizon.